Okay. Other thing in the news today. Still, 26th of September. Still in traffic. Anyways. Fees must fall. Fees must fall. Seriously. Hashtag fees must fall. Look, let's get this straight. I'm a child of the 1976 riots, as they put it. We keep talking about this thing of the Soweto uprising. I was in Standard 8 at Livingston High School in Cape Town in 1976. I remember that day still like it was yesterday. This year, 2016. 46 years ago now, isn't it? How much is that? How much is that? Is that right? 1976. It's 40 years. Wow. Anyways. So there's me, youngster. The day before then, not the June the 16th as we know it, June the 15th and June the 14th, we had some of the other students from some of the other schools. We had particularly the guys from Johannesburg who came down to us as SRC members. And there was a lot of stuff bubbling underneath in any event. You know, there was a lot of racial tension and other tensions constantly as an undercurrent to life in general in the 70s. So these dudes came down and explained to us the kinds of difficulties they were going through, that it reached a point, a breaking point. That firstly, they spoke in Zulu or Xhosa or Afrikaans or something else, you know. Sorry, not Afrikaans. Not the Afrikaans that the white people spoke. If we did speak Afrikaans, it was work up Afrikaans. It was different flavor Afrikaans. And the difference between Afrikaans isn't the same as Americanese versus English, you know. You can, if an American goes over to England, they can at least have some kind of conversation. But Afrikaans sometimes from the different communities was so different in any event. But the government at the time was insisting that all subjects had to be taught at school in Afrikaans. Now, here's a 15-year-old kid who struggles in the first place to speak English, and he's now having to be forced to learn Afrikaans, and he's having to learn a subject like biology, physics, or maths in a foreign language. That's a recipe for disaster. Doesn't matter how you cut it, that's a recipe for disaster. And that particular government at the time was constantly degrading the youth, the people of color, saying they're stupid, you know, they can't do it. And this we saw was just a way of being able to enforce stupidity. So there were a whole lot of stuff that everybody's unhappy about, not least of which was just the quality of education. And that anger had built up in any event, and all it needed was eventually for somebody to stand up and say, we can't take this anymore. So a couple of kids from Johannesburg had come down to us and says, will you stand with us? We want to say no. We want education not to be forced on us in a language that we wouldn't be able to understand. And it was like stupid question, and obviously we would. There wasn't going to be any question about that. And we said yes, we would. That was about the 14th of June. So we knew we needed to keep it under wraps because they told us, you know, at the time, the police, look, we'd already known about the Section 29s and there was already difficulty all the time anyway. So if we wanted to do something big a couple of days later on the 16th, we would have to do something seriously big, but we'd have to keep it quiet. So the 15th, the guys went to the art class, and the students, well, we didn't exactly lock the teachers out, because some of the teachers from Livingston and I were all in support of this. They had actually opened their doors up to the students. So there we were in the student rooms, in the science art rooms, making up posters. Got all the posters ready, printed it out nicely. That was the 15th. Everybody committed to being at school early the next morning. So June the 16th, everybody arrives at school early and congregated, got posters handed out, started singing some songs, and we took the posters out and started going towards the fence. Police all rocked up, guns, vans, and we looked at them and said, well, it's a peaceful march. There wasn't ever any discussion, any intention amongst any of us to pick up a stone and throw it at anybody. We wanted to express our outrage in a way which was clear, but passively. There's lots of discussions about Mahatma Gandhi's approach, and we were just talking about getting out in the streets and doing some stuff. So we left the gates, escorted by the police most of the way, shouting at us that, we should be going home. We're just students, we need to pack it up. There was lots of negotiations, people trying to discourage us from that. The problem was that the police started the violence, and they tried to beat us up. But then again, that was par for the course, At the time, the coloured boykie walking on the road, not doing what the white manure said he must do, got clapped quickly, got beaten up, got chucked into a van. But there were just too many of us to all be clapped and put into a van. And so it didn't end nicely. But that's not what I'm talking about. The point is, I was there. 85, I was at university, I was there. I was very much part of that whole process. The time was of a struggle in our life at the time. Today, I see a lot of patterns emerging. I'd like to talk to them about when I get a chance. But what gets me is that we have this thing of fees must fall. Now, this is not something we just a couple of students got up and decided that, something we cut for. This is as far as it must go. This is something which turns out to be orchestrated. Important thing that gets me thinking is that in 1976 the ANC had coordinated the youth movement very effectively. Very effectively. The point is that a couple of young kids had arrived in Claremont, Cape Town, at Livingston High School, sponsored by somebody, to get from Johannesburg to Cape Town to tell a bit of a story. So there was a political party underground that was coordinating activities nationally. Today, the ANC Youth League is not doing that any longer. The ANC isn't doing that. The DA isn't doing that. So we know that the third largest opposition party that has just come out of the last elections is the EFF. And we know that most of the leadership of EFF are ex-ANC guys who grew up hearing the stories of, and they were taught effectively how to mobilize the masses. And one of the first things I've picked up over the years has been that ANC cadres have to be able to prove the ability to mobilize the masses. So my take is this: the fees must fall is part of a political campaign of a political party in preparation for the 2019 elections and for the current elections. It's these hashtag something or the other must fall that gets people thinking that there is on the ground faces that they respect, that they look up to, that says this person made sense, and we're going to fight about roads must fall, this must fall, that must fall. It's using social media to talk to the youth, to get them to agree with a given view, and gets pushed forward. The political party needs to be able to prove that they've got enough power, enough clout, enough support for them to be able to get a group of youth to do the unspeakable. They've got to be able to convince a group of youth that they can burn a library, something of value to the community. But if they are willing to do that, then the party behind them has got clout. It gives them strength at the negotiation table. So the fees must fall hashtag is yet another nail in the coffin, another bullet in the armory. It's strengthening the arm of a negotiating party. Now we know that the ANC isn't pushing this, because the ANC has clearly come out saying students mustn't be, doing what they're doing. We know it's not the DA. But every single place I look at, it seems to be the rhetoric of the EFF. It aligns perfectly. EFF and something must fall. So we look at the students and we blame the students for the things which are happening. We look at the communities from which the students come and regard them as idiots, as stupid, as being insane. How could they burn something of value of their own? But in fact, we're missing the point. If this was a community in one town, we could say something's happening in that town. But this hashtag something must fall is so consistently across the country that we need to think about it slightly differently, shouldn't we? I mean, we had a concerted effort over a period of time that we pick up the same discussion nationally across multiple universities. And as the universities, note, it's the universities, all of them. I had an interesting conversation with a couple of journalists who subscribe to some of their views. And they're beginning to say that, Julius Malema makes sense. They're beginning to buy into that whole thought process. They're beginning to have the same rhetoric. And so the strategy of old has always been to capture the hearts and minds of the academics. Because if you've got a couple of professors agreeing with you, then heck man, they've got thousands of students that they can chat to, that they can convince to go in their direction. I remember I spent time at UWC in 85, at Livingston in 1976. I've seen that mechanization. I understand it, and I see it happening again today. 2016, I see the impact that the EFF is having on winning the hearts and minds of the students and convincing them to do the unspeakable. Why? Because we're 2 years away from a national election, and the EFF needs to be able to push their acceptance rate higher than 5%. And that's going to be counted in through votes. And the method that they're using is to tap into the anger and to stir it up, to create anger, to be able to get people to start accepting that what needs to happen is whatever, Today it's fees must fall. A year and a half ago it was statues and symbols of the previous regime must fall. Next year, every year, I'm convinced they have a brainstorming session and they'd sit down and say, well, what is our attack strategy? What is it that we need to stir up so that we can create dialogue, so that we can foster the anger? And this is what we need to be careful of. The strategy in the old days, I remember clearly during the 77 period, 78, when in Crossroads in Cape Town, the youth was pitted against the parents. We actually had gangs called, something along the lines of parents and the youth. They wore different armbands, they wore different regalia, as it were, to be able to separate themselves, so that we had this clear schism. And that's the point, is that in order for the EFF to win votes, they must create a rift, they must force a schism between the youth and the elderly. They must force the discussion. They must make sure that through force, they violently at times create dialogue. And that is regarded as a success. And we vote in favor of that. So that's my take. My belief is that what we see as crime in some places is too easily brushed over as crime. I strongly suspect that even the things like the crime on the trains, the theft of the lines, it is too concentrated, it is too well organized for it to be a couple of people going hungry, wanting to steal something to feed themselves or to make even a living out of it. It is too widespread, it is too well coordinated for it not to be a national movement, part of a structure that is assisting each other. During the ANC's dark years when they were in exile, we know that in order for them to be able to fund themselves, that there were a lot of military programs run, that there would be hijackings of cash in transit vehicles, and it's those thefts that had funded the movement. There were often those kinds of attempts that would say, we need to radicalize our communities and we need funds for that. Let's take that money from business so that the business will pay for our growth. And that is the point that we need to take notice of. I firmly believe that until we actually start educating our youth about how their minds can be twisted by a political party for their own gains, that we will never be able to solve the problem of the escalating crime. We will criminalize things like the hashtags something or the other must fall, without taking into consideration that actually what the dialogue is happening underneath that is a political dialogue, not a criminal, not a social dialogue. That is the concern I have, is I think we need to think carefully about the political aspect and how we're going to respond to that.